Have you ever imagined a place where a single drop of water is worshipped more than wealth itself? Not in poems or parables, but in the sun-scorched heart of Africa, this is no imagination. It is everyday truth. In Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation nestled in the unforgiving Sahel, the earth cracks wide open under the weight of a sky that forgot how to cry. The rainy season whispers by in just a few short weeks, and then the sun roars 45 degrees of heat, baking barren soil into silence. Children wake each morning not to the sound of birds, but to the long walk for water. Women travel 15 kilometers to touch a stream while men watch their crops wither like forgotten prayers. From 2019 to 2024, over 2 million souls joined the ranks of the hungry, not because they lacked strength, but because the rain never came. For decades, they waited eyes to the heavens, lips cracked with hope, but the sky offered nothing. And yet, right here in this land once defined by thirst, a miracle is happening. A river born not from clouds, but from courage. A canal nearly 300 kilometers long, carved by hands, not by fate. Stay with us, because this is not just another story. It is the future our ancestors dreamed of. Hit subscribe and walk with us towards an Africa that will never bow again. There are lands where rain is taken for granted, where rivers flow like lifelines no one ever questions. And then there is Burkina Faso. Here, the land remembers every drop, because each one is a promise unkept. The Sahel is not kind. It does not forgive. Burkina Faso lies trapped in its arid embrace. 70% of the territory is dust rock and drought. There are no coastlines, no Great Lakes, just sand, heat, and silence. In this silence, a history of struggle was carved. Farmers plant their seeds with more prayer than certainty, because 80% of the people depend on the rain alone to survive. And when the skies stay blue, when the clouds do not gather, entire villages unravel. Crops fail. Children grow thin. Cattle collapse under the sun. Between 2019 and 2024, the number of people facing severe food insecurity nearly quadrupled, from 700,000 to over 2.7 million. That is not a statistic. That is a sorrow. The rains come late or not at all, and when they do arrive, they crash down with fury, not grace washing away topsoil, drowning saplings, then disappearing. The rest of the year is waiting for the impossible. In the worst seasons, Burkina Faso loses over 500,000 tons of food. That is not a harvest lost, that is a generation starved. The old remember years when hunger sat at every table, when families bartered cattle, the last pride of their lineage, just to buy a sack of rice. They remember children walking miles, not for education, but for water. Schools emptied out during dry seasons. And when even water became cause for conflict, people fought not for land, not for gold, but for the right to drink. International organizations came charts in hand and slogans ready. Projects were drawn, funds pledged. Some worked for a time. The Millennium Challenge Corporation from the United States once invested in irrigation schemes in the Dai area, aiming to transform dry fields into fertile zones. They hoped to irrigate over 2,000 hectares, and indeed some lives were changed. But the scale never matched the scope of the suffering. The project closed with mixed results, some improvement, but never transformation. Elsewhere, the green belt around the capital, Ouagadougou, planted trees and vegetables on 2,000 hectares. It cooled the city, fed some mouths. But it was a patch on a wound too wide. In the countryside, farmers tried ancient ways to hold on. They dug zai pits, small craters in the ground, to trap what little rain fell. They carved half moons into the earth to catch runoff. They used compost and animal dung to give their seeds a fighting chance. In some regions, these techniques raised yields by 500%. Not because they were revolutionary, but because they worked with the land, not against it. Still, they could not reach everyone. Tradition alone cannot defeat a climate in revolt. For generations, the people of Burkina Faso endured. They endured because they had no choice. But enduring is not the same as living. Hope faded not in loud cries, but in quiet resignations. A nation cannot wait for salvation to fall from the sky. It must build it brick by brick, seed by seed, drop by drop. So the question began to rise not in government halls or foreign summits, but in the hearts of farmers, mothers, and school children. If the rain does not come, do we simply die waiting? That question lingered. It hung over the parched fields and dry wells like a challenge. And from that challenge, something began to stir, not in the clouds, but in the people. A sense that if no one would rescue them, they would rescue themselves. That is where this story truly begins, not with water, but with will. Not with aid, but with anger turned into action. And standing at the heart of that awakening One man dared to speak what others only whispered. If the skies are silent, we will become the rain. If nature turns its back, we will build our own future. That man's name is Ibrahim Traore, and his shovel did not dig for water. It dug for freedom. In every generation, there comes a leader not born of privilege, but of pain. A man shaped not in gilded halls, but in scorched fields where his hands learned the weight of soil and his heart the thirst of the people. Ibrahim Traore was not raised on promises. He was raised on dust. His earliest memories were not of parades or praise, but of hunger, of watching his mother break bread in half so both of them could eat. He learned young that dignity was not given. It was grown like crops in dry earth, hard-won and deeply rooted. As a boy, he dug wells by hand, not out of idealism, but survival. He did not read about scarcity in books. He lived it. And so, when the nation cried out once more, when the fields cracked, the rivers dried, and the children walked further than ever to fetch water, it was not a headline to him. It was a memory coming back to life. But this time he would not wait. He stood before the people, before Parliament, and before the ghosts of every failed promise, and he made one declaration. If the heavens will not give us water, we shall bring the water ourselves. Not with aid, not with debt, but with determination. That was the birth of the Canal of Will. Not a poetic name, but a literal truth. Because this canal would not be funded by the West, nor shaped by foreign consultants. It would be born from the hands of the Burkina Faso, a 276-kilometer artery of life cutting across the desert wide enough for 4 trucks to drive side by side. It would channel water from the northern mountains to the southern fields, reviving 500,000 hectares of land. And every centimeter of it would be paid for not by loans or conditions, but by the people themselves. 500 million United States dollars. That was the cost. A figure that would frighten many. But Traore refused to bow. He turned to Burkina Faso's own gold reserves, a national savings fund built not for rainy days, but for dry realities. And then he did something no president had dared before. He asked the people to become builders of their own destiny. Each citizen would contribute the price of a single seed, not a tax, not a fee, a choice, a gesture of faith. The campaign was called One Seed, One Drop of Blood. It was not just a slogan. It was a reckoning. Thousands came forward. Farmers who had lost entire harvests gave what little they had. Women who had carried water on their heads for decades gave more. Even children with coins saved from school lunches insisted on being part of it. Because this was not just a canal. It was a mirror in which every citizen could see their strength reflected. And so, when the day of groundbreaking arrived, it was not marked by ribbon cutting or long speeches. There were no foreign dignitaries, no glittering banquets. There was only the sound of engines, the rhythm of shovels, and the sight of a nation rising from the dirt. Traore did not stand behind glass. He stood in the mud. He wore no suit, only a worker's uniform stained with dust soaked with sweat. At midday, he sat on the earth beside the excavator crew sharing a meal of millet and water. The sun showed no mercy, but neither did he. When the azan call to prayer echoed across the plain, machines fell silent. Workers laid down mats at the canal's edge and prayed. Steel, soil, and spirit. That image burned into the hearts of millions, watching live across the country. This was no longer just a construction site. It was a sacred ground. A battlefield where the enemy was not an army, but a fate long accepted. And perhaps the most powerful moment was not the first shovel of dirt, but the silence that followed. A silence of clarity. That for the first time in decades, the people were not waiting for help. They were helping themselves. From that moment on, the Canal of Will became more than infrastructure. It became identity. And as news spread across Africa, one question echoed not just in Burkina Faso, but far beyond its borders. If a nation without a coastline surrounded by desert can build a river from its own blood and gold, then what is the excuse of those with more? If you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say amen in the comments below. No rain came. No divine rescue descended. And yet, in the dry belly of Burkina Faso, a river now flows. Not a miracle from the heavens, but from human hands. The Canal of Will is no metaphor. It is concrete steel, sweat, and intention. Stretching 276 kilometers across the Sahel, it slices through rock and sand like a scar of defiance. At 600 feet wide, it is vast enough for 2 trucks to carry harvests side by side. Every 5 kilometers, branch canals stretch outward like veins, feeding every field, every village, every memory of what this land once was, before the sky stopped answering. But in a place where the sun devours every drop, how can water survive? The answer lies in the fusion of tradition and technology. The canal bed is lined with a specialized composite, a concrete polymer blend that reduces seepage by up to 80% compared to bare earth. No longer does the water disappear into the thirsty ground. It flows with purpose. Along both banks, thousands of drought-resistant trees have been planted, acacia, neem, and moringa, standing like guardians. Their roots hold the soil, their shade cools the air, and their leaves whisper of renewal. In sections where the sun strikes hardest, engineers have installed floating solar panels. These are no ordinary energy devices. They do double duty, shielding the water from evaporation and generating electricity to power pumps. In some segments, evaporation has dropped by over 90%. It is a canopy of survival powered by sunlight, protecting the very thing the sun once stole. And still, the canal does more. Every 20 kilometers, there is a regulating reservoir, a kind of water battery, storing reserves for when dry spells return. These are not decorative. They are strategic. They ensure that even if one section is damaged, the flow will not stop. The system is layered, decentralized, and fiercely local. Each reservoir, each gate, each pump has been designed to resist not just nature, but neglect. There are no vulnerable computerized controls. Only sturdy hand-operated mechanisms designed by Burkinabe engineers for Burkinabe farmers. And the water? It comes from the north, from hidden springs and underground aquifers nestled at the base of the mountains. These sources are collected into a massive artificial reservoir, a man-made lake carved not with ease but determination. Solar-powered pumps draw this water into the canal, pushing it southward with no reliance on diesel or imported fuel. Energy independence is baked into every kilometer. But this project is not the first attempt to irrigate this unforgiving land. Long before concrete and turbines, local farmers used techniques passed down for generations. The Zai pit's small craters filled with compost captured the rare rains and turned deserts into gardens. Half-moon bunds curved across hillsides, slowing water and allowing it to seep deep. These methods once lifted crop yields by hundreds of percent, not because of scale, but because they honored the land's logic. Traore did not ignore this heritage. He built upon it. Alongside the main canal, these ancient methods are being revived, enhanced, and integrated. This is not a rupture with the past. It is a resurrection. At every stage, Burkinabe wisdom meets 21st century engineering. Together, they speak one language: survival with dignity. Every element of the canal is designed not just to work but to last, to be repairable by local hands, to be taught in local schools. This is no showpiece for foreign investors. It is not polished for brochures or summit speeches. It is messy, massive, and magnificent, a river of will cutting through centuries of silence. Today, if you were to fly over this land, you would see more than a ditch. You would see an artery, a flowing statement, from north to south, from despair to determination, a green pulse slowly bringing life back to the land. And in that pulse lies a message to the continent. Captain Ibrahim, latest news is not a speech, not a law, not a policy. It is this canal, a river drawn by the people's hands, guided by his vision. It says, we will not bow to drought. We will not beg for help. We will build. Water may quench the soil, but it is knowledge that keeps it fertile. Captain Traore understood this better than any engineer. A canal may carry life, but without understanding, it can also carry waste. So, as the waters began to move, so too did a new kind of force across Burkina Faso, a river of learning. Alongside the physical infrastructure of the Canal of Will, a parallel system was quietly built, one not of cement or steel, but of minds and methods. Modern agricultural centers rose along the canal's banks, not in cities, but in farming communities. These were not elite academies, but humble workshops where seasoned farmers and young apprentices sat side by side, learning how to farm, not harder, but wiser. Here, old knowledge met new science. Classes were taught on water-saving techniques, drip irrigation that wastes nothing, mulching that protects the roots, cover cropping that shields the soil. Farmers learned to select drought-resistant crops, millet, strains that survive harsh sun, sorghum that thrives in dry seasons, and legumes that enrich the earth. These were not lectures. They were lifelines. And they were taught in native languages by instructors born of the same soil as their students. But the learning did not stop at the canal. Traore knew that many could not travel to training centers. So the government sent education on wheels. Mobile schools carried in modified trucks, and buses rolled through dusty back roads, stopping at every village within the canal's reach. They carried seed samples, compost kits, solar tools, and a promise. Inside those buses, children who once dropped out of school to fetch water now learned about pest control using neem oil, about composting with livestock manure, about harvesting with zero waste. Some of these children would become the first literate members of their family, and they would return to the fields not just with notebooks, but with strategies. For the first time in its history, Burkina Faso's farmers were sowing more than crops. They were sowing technology into the soil. They were learning to read the weather, not fear it, to monitor soil acidity, to measure water use. In a nation where textbooks were once a luxury, this was a revolution, and it was growing faster than the canal itself. The goal was not to turn every farmer into a scientist, but to turn every field into a school. Along the canal's length, demonstration farms sprung up like lighthouses. Each one showed plot by plot what change looked like. A hectare irrigated with precision tools produced 5 times more than a hectare left to chance. Goats grazed on newly grown grass beside the water's edge. Trees planted as windbreaks began bearing fruit. Women's cooperatives used canal water to grow vegetables once thought impossible in dry zones: okra, tomatoes, peppers. Local economies began to ripple with new trade. Markets once dry were now lined with green, and none of it relied on foreign aid. Not the seeds, not the instructors, not the fuel. Solar panels powered everything. Local mechanics maintained the pumps. And in each village, at least one young person was trained as a canal steward, a guardian of flow, of fairness, of futures. They monitored water levels, repaired gates, and resolved disputes. They became symbols of a new Burkina Faso, one where water did not divide but united. Soon, the world began to notice. Delegations arrived from Ghana, Nigeria, Mali, and Benin. They came not with lectures, but with questions. How was this canal funded? How was education embedded into engineering? Could their own nations replicate this model? Letters poured in from community leaders across West Africa proposing a shared vision, a water axis across borders, a union not of treaties, but of tributaries. On a continent long divided by colonial lines, Traore saw something else, a flow that knew no flags. The canal, he said, must not only carry water, it must carry peace. And peace, he reminded the nation, is not simply the absence of conflict. It is the presence of dignity. A man who feeds himself walks taller. A child who drinks clean water dreams deeper. A nation that teaches its farmers does not beg, it builds. So when the canal stretches across fields and borders, it does more than feed mouths. It nourishes minds. And in doing so, it makes one truth clear: water alone cannot free a people. But water, when carried by knowledge, when guided by wisdom, when shared with pride, that is liberation. Great works are never born in silence. And when the first whispers of Burkina Faso's Canal of Will reached foreign shores, they did not bring applause. They brought questions, doubts, warnings. Western media outlets, once silent when Burkina Faso's children walked 15 kilometers for a mouthful of water, suddenly found their voice. Articles appeared with titles like "Environmental Concerns Over Massive Canal Project," or "Is Burkina Faso Dreaming Too Big?" They worried not about the people, but about the precedent. That a poor, landlocked country dared to think for itself to build without asking permission. International consultants, briefcases in hand, arrived in Ouagadougou with smiles and suggestions. They spoke of feasibility studies, environmental impact assessments, and international loan options with favorable conditions. But behind the soft voices were hard terms contracts that would bind the canal's flow to foreign decisions clauses that would place water access under oversight bodies in Brussels or Washington. In the name of safety, they offered submission, and Traore knew this pattern. He had seen it before in dams that ended up owned by banks and roads that led nowhere but to debt. So he stood before Parliament, face unflinching, voice unwavering. "If we let others build this canal," he said, "then the water will not flow by the will of our people. It will flow by the will of the contract. And once the water is not ours, neither is the land, the crop, nor the future of our children." The chamber erupted in applause, but across the ocean a chill set in. A leaked memo from a European think tank revealed the deeper truth. If this project succeeds, it read, it will set a dangerous precedent. Other African nations may follow suit and reject dependency models. Dangerous to whom? To the people of Burkina Faso, or to those who profit from its poverty? Then came the attacks. Media headlines shifted. The canal is underfunded. Farmers oppose the project. It will dry up before it reaches the fields. Selective photographs were circulated, sections still under construction, muddy embankments, cracked cement. What they did not show were the completed linings of concrete polymer, the solar panels floating on the water's surface, or the reservoirs already brimming with promise. On social media, misinformation spread like wildfire. Accounts, some traceable to overseas agencies, questioned the project's scale, even accused Traoré of authoritarianism. But the people knew better. They had seen the canal with their own eyes. They had touched the water with their own hands. National television responded not with rebuttals, but with reality. They broadcasted from the excavation zones. Live. No edits. No filters. Farmers walking along the new banks. Women filling jerry cans without walking for hours. Children splashing near pump stations. And most powerful of all, Traoré himself, wearing workman's boots, his hands still dusty, shoveling beside laborers. That image, the president, not above but among, spread faster than any rumor. The government's campaign did not rely on slogans. It relied on stories. A mother in Kaya, who once feared for her sons every dry season, now watering her vegetable patch beside the canal. A grandfather in Fata and Gorma, who planted mango trees for the first time in 30 years. A boy from Toma, who no longer skips school to help fetch water. These were not staged testimonials. They were daily miracles. Traoré did not deny the challenges. He welcomed them. Some canal walls had collapsed during storms. Some pumps needed replacing. There were days when progress slowed. But unlike the foreign-funded projects of the past, this one was transparent. The setbacks were shared publicly. The response was not silence, but mobilization. Workers volunteered to repair faster. Engineers redesigned weaknesses. The people were not spectators. They were stakeholders. Because this was not about pride alone. It was about ownership. It was about building something no one could take away. A resource that did not come with interest rates. A canal with no foreign flag at its source. In the words of one farmer, "We have paid with our sweat. No one will steal this river." Burkina Faso, latest news, may not trend on global stock exchanges. But in Africa, it is the sound of footsteps by the canal, of trees rising, of grain markets blooming, of a people who refuse to be told what they could not do. This canal is not just concrete. It is resistance. It is redemption. On the day the first waters of the Canal of Will flowed into the fields, the cheers of farmers echoed like thunder. But beneath the noise was something deeper, a sigh, a collective exhale from a nation that had held its breath for generations. Those first drops touched dry soil, but their ripple traveled across hearts, borders, and centuries. It was not just irrigation. It was liberation. Burkina Faso had saved itself. Green now grows where only sand once lay. Fields of rice, cotton, and corn shimmer under the sun, no longer starved for water. Cattle drink not from desperation, but from abundance. Schoolchildren walk with books, not buckets. And mothers who once watched their crops wither now watch their seeds sprout in lands long abandoned by hope. This canal is more than a project. It is proof. Proof that when people rise together, when leaders stand among and not above, when dreams are backed by dirt-stained hands and gold from their own soil, nothing is impossible. The numbers are only the beginning. 500,000 hectares revived agricultural output, increased by 60%, millions lifted from hunger. But behind the numbers is belief. Belief that Africa is not a continent of dependency, but of destiny. Today, as the world still labels nations like Burkina Faso with words like poor or unstable, a new truth flows through this land, not in silence, but in water. And that water speaks. It says we are no one's burden. We are builders. It says our future is not charity, it is choice. This is a new chapter, not written in ink, but in canal walls, in roots and rain, that we no longer wait for. And as the sun sets over the banks of this man-made river, one figure stands still. Ibrahim Traore, silent, not in search of applause, but watching. Not for glory, but to remind the world that some leaders do not rule, they build. For 100 years, this canal will speak his name, not with statues or slogans, but with water that feeds a people. So we ask you now, what will your nation build? If Burkina Faso can turn dust into promise, what can your hands create? If this story moves something in your chest, do not scroll past. Like, share, speak. Subscribe because they hid our history long enough. Let us speak our future out loud. Thank you for being here. We will see you in the next story, the kind they still do not want you to hear. Africa Rise.